Hello and welcome all to another episode of the Dynasty Warzone Start Sits. As always, just kidding. I'm your host this week. I am not Kyle. I am Dallas, normally the host of the Rookie Rundown, and I'm here to talk Start Sits with all of you today. Guys, it's a good time to be here. I had some wins, had some losses. Kyle had some wins, had some losses on the last week's episode. And this week is looking just as promising. There's some pretty fun matchups that are going on currently, and I'm pretty excited to talk about quite a few of them. We'll start off a little bit differently just since I'm the first one here. It'll also let anyone that wants to join live hop on whenever they want to. But let's talk a little bit about tonight's game. We have the Seattle Seahawks versus the Los Angeles Rams. It's going to be quite a good matchup, and I think that it's going to be kind of a heavyweight bout. Realistically, these two teams met in the playoffs last year, and I can see the exact same thing happening this year. Specifically, the NFC West is one of the most dominant divisions, if not the utmost dominant division in all of the NFL. And it's pretty exciting to see this type of matchup right when teams are starting to click quite a bit. You have two defensive lines that can be dominant at times. The Rams have kind of sunk back into a little bit of a shell over the last couple weeks, as have Seattle since their week one performance that kind of lit the world on fire, making everyone just assume that their defensive line would be pretty great. I'm excited to see the matchup tonight. Specifically, I'm excited to see Jalen Ramsey shadowing DK Metcalf. It's been a matchup that has leaned towards and favored Ramsey over the last couple of games. DK has had one good showing out of the 4 times that he's played against Jalen Ramsey since he showed up with the Rams. So it's pretty exciting to see the matchup. It's always a good time. I would probably stray away from starting DK Metcalf this week if you have literally any other options. I know it's kind of hard because odds are he is your wide receiver 1 on your team, but it's a guy that I'd be shying away for. I would be expecting quite a big game actually this week from a guy like Tyler Lockett. So just stay tuned to this game tonight, guys. It's going to be a fun one. We're about to actually hear in about 30 minutes from the NFL and from the Seahawks if Chris Carson will start. We got a report earlier this week that he's dealing with a chronic, kind of like an arthritic neck issue that's been flaring up constantly. This is actually one of the first times that we've heard anything popping up about this. So it opened my eyes that maybe this is part of the reason that he's missed some games over the last couple of years, even though he's been dealing with some other ailments. I'm pretty excited to see Alex Collins if he does actually get the starting role in this offense. It's not a very good matchup, though. As I said, the front 7 for the Rams is pretty dangerous. So it's one of those things that could be a little bit sketchy for a lot of the bigger names outside of mainly Tyler Lockett and then anyone really on the Rams side. The Rams right now, the pass game can't be stopped except for Arizona, apparently. They're the only ones that know how to. But that's another weird side note, how Arizona has actually owned the Rams over the last couple years, actually. So it's a matchup that should lean most likely to see that Matthew Stafford to Cooper Kupp connection continue, but it's also a matchup that could show some other options just due to the complete barren cabinet that is this Seattle defense. So that's tonight's matchup. My prediction, I expect a Rams victory. I honestly think that the Rams front 7 is probably going to make Russell Wilson look mortal again. He's been cooking at the start of the season again. They beat the 49ers last week in kind of a weird game, but it was a very slow start. And if that happens against the Rams, as has been shown this season, they take advantage of it, and they take advantage of it quick. So again, my prediction, Rams over Seahawks. Specific score-wise, I'm looking somewhere in the range of like a 28-20 victory for the Rams in tonight's game. But we will go ahead and transition specifically into my start sits. We will go ahead and start, as always, with the quarterback position here. So with the quarterback, my start of the week is actually Mr. Mac Jones versus the Houston Texans. Mac Jones has been extremely consistent, but his main issue this year has been against the pass rush. So when going up against a good pass rush, he almost seems a little bit stressed. It's not that he's panicked, but it's something that popped up in college where if you were able to hit him, it made him basically acts like he couldn't rely on his offensive line, and he started to force things. He started to just lose some of that pinpoint accuracy that makes him such an attractive prospect at the quarterback position. He hasn't lit the world on fire, but he has had the passing volume this year. And if there's two defenses I want to pass against this year, it is Atlanta and it's the Houston Texans. The pass rush has died down quite a bit from what we expected and what we saw in week 1 when they got that surprise victory over the Jags. And I expect it to continue, kind of go on the decline. We saw quite a bit of fight in the first 2 weeks from the Houston Texans, but they kind of look like they're limping. Davis Mills just isn't the answer. He can't basically keep drives alive, which is the main issue. So if Houston's defense is out there for long enough, I expect to see Mac Jones kind of carve them up, especially with the questions that are in the run game, with the injury to James White, the inefficiency last week, specifically with Damian Harris, and Ramondre Stevenson still in the doghouse with Bill Belichick. So once again, my start of the week at quarterback position is Mr. Mac Jones. Last week, it was Trevor Lawrence. He did not light the world on fire, but he got you a solid 18 points. For someone that you probably weren't going to be starting last week. Where I was wrong last week was my sit of the week in Lamar Jackson. They ate up the Broncos in a way that I didn't expect them to do. The Baltimore defense basically beat up Teddy Bridgewater so bad that he couldn't come in because of a concussion, and then ended up just putting the nails to Drew Lock. So I think it could be a similar situation. Going in with Baltimore's defense, it's one that I would be starting in all formats. If you have them this week, it's a pretty good matchup. But my sit of the week at quarterback this week is actually a guy who's been extremely efficient for you from the actual fantasy quarterback position, and that's Mr. Jalen Hurts. They had a very good game plan last week against the Kansas City Chiefs, but the Carolina defense is not the Kansas City Chiefs defense. When you're looking at what Carolina ran into last week with the Dallas Cowboys, that offense is pretty prolific. It's pretty impossible to stop on all three levels of the run game, the pass game, and the intermediate tight end work and slot receiver work, as opposed to the outside work that you're getting from Lamb, Wilson, and Amari Cooper. Hurts doesn't have the weapons, the experience, the arm, or the poise in the pocket. The rushing floor is keeping him alive, and a lot of garbage time is keeping him alive. But Carolina has shown again and again that they're able to basically, once again, my phrase of the day is put the nails to teams when they are on defense. So when I'm looking at Carolina's defense, who just acquired Stephon Gilmore, still not going to be playing Stephon Gilmore, but only looks to continue to retool basically this elite defense that we've seen this year. I am very excited to see what they are able to do against this mobile quarterback in Hurts. I don't think he has the poise, like I said, as Dak Prescott does. So looking at that type of situation, I think you should temper expectations. I think that the tight ends will most likely be limited. That'll be the focus point, and they're going to basically have to win the game if Philadelphia wants to, with Jalen Hurts' legs and passes on the outside deep to Jalen Reagor if they're looking to win. I don't expect it to happen. I expect Carolina to bounce back after last week, and thus my set of the week is Jalen Hurts. At the running back position, I'm looking at my start of the week of both Buffalo running backs versus the Chiefs. If there's one thing that we've seen time and time again over the last 3 years specifically, it's that you can run anytime and as much as you want against the Kansas City Chiefs, and that has continued throughout the first couple games of this season. Last week, it was pretty pitiful to see what they were able to do on the ground against the Chiefs, even with minimal attempts. Their per yard edge average was pretty good. When you have a rushing quarterback, it opens up the run game even more. And thus, when you're looking at it specifically, thanks, Mike. I actually just saw it at the exact same time. That's why I looked over to the side. Chris Carson is out for anyone listening right now. So that means, I guess, guns a-blazing in the flex position on a Alex Collins. But again, temper those expectations. My starts above both of them, if you have either one of these guys on the roster, ahead of Alex Collins would be either one of the Buffalo running backs against the Chiefs. They've had a consistent split down the middle between Zack Moss and Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary has been actually extremely efficient yardage-wise on a per-carry average. He just hasn't busted any long plays. Zack Moss has been slightly less efficient, but has seen those specific red zone touches and the goal line touches that we all covet from the running back position. So that's why you see them about the same in the rankings for PPR and non-PPR. They're seeing about even work in the pass game. It's just with the split down the middle, it's been a little bit sketchy as to who you can start. But as we've seen, KC has gone up against multiple split backfields. There's been success on both sides of the running game for what we saw with the Cleveland Browns, what we saw in Baltimore's rush game with Latavius Murray and Trevon Williams, I think is what his name is. But both those guys, the split backfield hasn't been an issue specifically for any of the teams going up against Kansas City. And that's why I'm advising you to start both of the running backs this week, even over a guy like Alex Collins, who now has the start tonight on Thursday against the Rams. My sit of the week has been a guy that's continued to underperform and continued to cede work to his backfield mate, and that's Antonio Gibson versus the New Orleans Saints. So the New Orleans Saints currently are the second-rated rush defense in the league, albeit they did get gutted by Saquon Barkley last week, but Saquon is a little bit different. He's hitting a stride, and I don't account that specifically for being what we should expect from the New Orleans defense going forward. A couple of injuries and just kind of a bad game script last week was really the issue, as well as an incontinuity on offense. But when I'm looking at Antonio Gibson, he's basically going to be running into a brick wall. The strength is the rush defense for New Orleans. He is not seeing as many touches as he saw in the first 2 weeks of the season. It's gone down actually in each of the last 2 weeks. And we continue to see with Tyler Heineke, again, we go through this every time, guys, his propensity to pass the ball not to Antonio Gibson, but to either run himself or his outlet passes going to still J.D. McKissic. So for Antonio Gibson, I think the upside is capped. He's been a consistent, basically 8 to 12 point running back each and every week, even if he is getting 15 to 20 touches. He just can't basically capitalize in the red zone. He can't capitalize on long, explosive plays for touchdowns outside of that one screen play that he took to the house. He's an explosive weapon, but he's being underused basically in this offense. Going into the wide receiver position, my start of the week is Mr. Marvin Jones. I'm going back to the well, this week, guys. If you listened to last week or the week before, my wide receiver position is probably the sketchiest. So I will tell you to take both of these takes with a grain of salt. I've been extremely consistent with my running backs, my tight ends, and about 50-50 on my quarterbacks. But I've been shitting the bed, lack of a better phrase, when it comes to the actual wide receiver position. I told you guys to start Marvin Jones last week due to the matchups. It would have been good if he had capitalized on a couple of the big, deep throws that he had thrown to him. They were kind of overthrown by Trevor Lawrence. There was a weird panic thing going out with his rollouts. He kept running back kind of Patrick Mahomes-esque and then tossing it deep, but was unable to connect with Marvin Jones on a couple of them. He's still leading the team in targets, and with the injury to DJ Chark last week, Marvin Jones is pretty much a lock to see a ton of volume and a ton of upside against one of the worst pass defenses in the league in the Tennessee Titans. Looking at my sit of the week is a guy who has been above average performing, and that's the wide receiver one in Indianapolis. That is Mr. Michael Pittman Jr. He is going up against what I said is a buzzsaw on the outside of a defense in the Baltimore Ravens on Monday night. Pittman has been a consistent target hog for the Colts with the injuries that they've been dealing with. But if there's one position you cannot bully the Baltimore defense on, it is with your wide receivers. You can get away with your linebackers in space, the short dump offs, but anything on the outside or deep target wise is something that is pretty much always going to be locked down with the Baltimore Ravens defense. So a guy like Michael Pittman, whose game is predicated mostly on the outside or designed screens on the outside, when you're playing against extremely athletic corners like the Baltimore Ravens have, that's something that is not going to fly long term. So that's, once again, Marvin Jones is my start again for the week for the wide receivers. And my sit is Mr. Michael Pittman Jr. When I delve into the position that I've hit the best, most likely, over the last 3 weeks, it's the tight end position. This, guys, is primarily just based off of matchup and usage. That's what I've been funneling off of for my picks. Anything I'm recommending to you here is something that I'm doing on my own teams. So once again, I'm sitting Pittman in 2 leagues, and I'm starting Marvin Jones once again in 5 leagues this week. They're just kind of reliable. The tight end position is the exact same way in that capacity as to my start of the week is actually a new guy on his team. I'm going back to that well and back to that advantageous matchup against the Tennessee Titans with a guy like Dan Arnold. So he came to the team last week, had minimal practice, and was immediately a favorite target, specifically on third down for Trevor Lawrence last week. He looked good. He had an explosive screen game, and he looked like he had the power and wherewithal basically for finding the space in zones, which is something that not all tight ends can do. It's always fascinating to me how that works. But when I'm looking at Dan Arnold, I'm looking at a team that, once again, like I said, lost DJ Chark on the outside, is going to be looking for weapons, has found its run game. Dan Arnold is not the primary blocking tight end now. He is now the move tight end for them. So he's going to be seeing a lot of that short to intermediate work, allowing Marvin Jones to stretch the field more. So I would honestly expect a heavy reliance on the pass game in this week against Tennessee, who has been incapable of stopping pretty much everything. And that's why I'm recommending Dan Arnold. He's probably cheap and or if not free on every single waiver wire that you're at right now for most of your leagues, as well as it's just an easy fix. The tight end position still is kind of up in the air with even the big names in Mark Andrews outside of 1 week, and George Kittle underperforming pretty heavily. TJ Hawkinson has seen his production decrease each of the last 4 weeks. You have a lot of tight end splits happening as well, and you have some underperformers of the middle tier guys that people thought had some high upside in your Cole Kmets, in your Tyler Higbees. So when you're looking at the options on the tight end market, I would feel more comfortable this week starting a guy like Dan Arnold than I would starting any of those split tight end fields, or even a guy like Evan Ingram, who people are still chasing the upside. But even with all the injuries that have come in New York, you're still looking at targets going to the rookie and Kadarius Toney, going to the outside to a bunch of guys that no one's ever heard of, basically, and even deep shots to John Ross. They're switching the offense as opposed to filling the roles that they already had on their team. That's why Dan Arnold is above pretty much any streamer that is currently on waiver wires for most of the teams out there. And he's my start at the tight end position. Looking at my sit, I once again have an entire position group. And this is one that has been kind of frustrating to a lot of people this season in general, but one that I specifically don't like this week. And that is the Eagles tight ends. This should be no surprise if you were listening and tuning in to the actual quarterback sit that I had in Jalen Hurts. But this Carolina defense is extremely good at funneling production into one specific position. Their front seven is very good at getting to the quarterback, and their linebackers predicate their game on speed. They're extremely quick and extremely good at spying specifically. Shaq Thompson is one of the most athletic linebackers currently in the game, and I see a large portion of his job either going to be spying Jalen Hurts or shadow coverage on the tight end group. Trying to play roulette with which tight end scores in this Philadelphia passing game, which is not prolific enough to actually support two, is something that should be a little bit concerning to anyone who is housing these two. And that is why I'm recommending you sit both Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. Both of them saw a lot of red zone work last week against Kansas City, but as I explained, that KC defense is a sieve and is not something that you should be basically basing any production off of. So just to recap for anyone tuning in right now, my starts are at each position: Mac Jones at quarterback, both of the Buffalo running backs at RB, Marvin Jones once again at wide receiver, and Dan Arnold at the tight end position. And my players to avoid and sit this week are Jalen Hurts versus Carolina, Antonio Gibson versus New Orleans, Michael Pittman Jr. versus the Baltimore Ravens, and both of the both of the Eagles tight ends versus the Carolina Panthers as well. There's a couple of just bad matchups based off of the way that teams go this week. And again, it's just something that I'm just not trying to get into with anything that's a split position from the tight end position. I'm kind of straying away. I've been avoiding all the Cleveland matchups, all the Philadelphia matchups, all of the Indianapolis matchups at tight end. It's just so hard to predict which one is going to score and when. And in a position that if you don't have one of the top guys, chasing that tight end gets even harder if you have more than one guy filling that move tight end role. Looking at just a couple of other things this week that have me intrigued. Like we said, Chris Carson's out for tonight's game, so I'm intrigued to see how this rush game can stay alive, if it can at all. Russell Wilson has always done better if there's a consistent pass game behind him, as most quarterbacks have. So if Alex Collins is basically just a key for the defense for the Rams to try and stop, it's something that I'm a little bit concerned about. I wouldn't expect a lot from him, like I said. So if you have better options, I would try to play over him. But if you do not, I would go ahead and recommend to just throw him in the flex. If you're relying on him for anything more than probably 10 to 12 points, you are asking for quite a bit. I'll transition now into any questions that we're getting in. The first one is from my man, Eric Smith. He asked if I am starting Shenault or Robinson. He had Ridley, but yeah, I feel you on that one. One of my comments earlier in the day was if Kyle Pitts doesn't blow up this week, I have no idea when it is. Also, you just said Allen Robinson. Sorry about that, Eric. I'm seeing that now. For me, the Chicago matchup is one that could be advantageous, but I've yet to see a consistent connection between Allen Robinson and Justin Fields. And this is coming from a Bears fandom here, with the reliance on Shenault in that short to intermediate game in the same capacity that I like Dan Arnold this week. I'd probably be leaning Shenault. Even as a Bears fan, Eric, like I said, a huge Robinson fan, have him pretty much everywhere. I feel very uncomfortable starting him right now. I'm expecting more of him if I'm starting him in my RB2 position, which is I'm assuming basically what you're doing. And so when I'm looking at this, I have to lean Shenault just based off of the productivity. They've had comparable numbers this year, but Shenault has a better per game average than what Allen Robinson has. So I'm going to lean Shenault in that situation. Going on to the next question, we have some Chris Carson love. I kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, David, but David Donaldson asked how high I am on Collins. Collins is a flex play at best for me right now. This Rams front is pretty good at stopping everyone not named David Montgomery this year. It's a shame what happened to him. Again, a lot of Chicago-related content here. But when I'm looking at a guy like Collins, I'm looking – I don't see the touchdown upside is my issue here. Russell Wilson likes to pass the ball, and with a team that has had his numbers specifically over the last couple of years, I see him being a little more greedy tonight. They just haven't been relying on the run game as they should have. Even last week in a matchup where they realistically could have done a little bit better on the ground, the work was split. That was even before Carson got hurt. So unless Collins sees over 20 touches, I'm not optimistic about super high numbers. So I would temper expectations is what I'm going to tell you. The next question from Mr. Cole McGregor. Collins or Damian Williams, since we are talking Bears? That is a great question. This is another situation where Damian has looked good, but even when David Montgomery was healthy, short of that first week when it was a sole reliance on him, it has been pretty much a split backfield when you're looking at Chicago and the way that they are actually running the ball. Khalil Herbert is going to be used quite a bit. They just traded a 2023 6th-round pick to the Miami Dolphins for Jakeem Grant to come in and basically solely play the kick and punt return job in Chicago, meaning that they're expecting Khalil Herbert basically to only be basically producing from the running back position on the team with the injuries that they're dealing with. Tariq Cohen's nowhere close to coming back either. So when I'm looking at Damian Williams, they're very close. I would probably lean the matchup of Chicago and go with Damian Williams over Collins in that situation, just because there has been a reliance on the run game, specifically since we were praying for Bill Lazor to take over play calling in Chicago. He did. He likes to rely on the run game. That's exactly what you saw last week. And again, with Justin Fields finding his feet, I would lean Damian Williams over Collins. Another Collins question, it's going to be a popular topic for anyone that's in live right now, or Javonte Williams. This one, for me, depends on whether or not Teddy Bridgewater is active or not, which I know sucks in your situation because you have to play Collins tonight if you're going to play him. I would probably be playing Collins over Javonte in this situation just due to the backfield split and the most likely possibility that Drew Lock is the starter. Melvin Gordon's still healthy, still producing, still outproducing. Honestly, when you're looking at it, Javonte Williams, they're both kind of touchdown upside guys, but from a pure volume standpoint, I'll probably lean Collins in that situation, just due to the uncertainty that you're looking at with the Broncos matchup and the quarterback position. But looking at it right now, guys, it's been kind of a short and sweet one. Didn't have as many questions this one. Kind of expected that. It was kind of rushed, put together little experience here with Kyle missing out. I filled in, gave you a couple of quick start sits. As always, I will be tuning in on Thursdays going forward just to kind of match up with Kyle's takes at the start sits, give a little bit of comedic relief, and as always, the Baker Mayfield headbands. I've been told that they need to come back, so I'll do my best to come back. For anyone joining live, thanks for your questions. These have been my start sits, and once again, predicting a Rams victory. My parting shot that I go into, it's kind of my thing. I've been okay with it, I guess is what we'll call it. For tonight's game, expected to be a Tyler Lockett game. I think Tyler Lockett is the highest scoring player in tonight's game. I just think the matchups are calling for it. The reliance is going to have to be there. And this is most likely in the prime time going to be one of those games that we always see where Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett just kind of take over the passing game. I still think that the Rams eke it out, but I wouldn't be shocked if this is one of those 2 touchdown games for a guy like Tyler Lockett. I am Dallas. Find me on Twitter at Salad Galore. And as always, until next week, this has been Start Sit.